Greetings and thank you everybody for tuning in for Global Entrepreneurship Week in Jacksonville, Florida. We have events going on around the globe this week. We're celebrating entrepreneurship in every way, in every level and industry. There are 4 focus areas that Global Entrepreneurship Week will be focusing on, and it's education, inclusion, tech, ecosystems, and diversity. And today we choose to deal with our education piece because we've been hearing a lot about crisis risk management and ransomware in the news, not just with our election, but with even companies of their websites or their systems being held for ransom. So I met these 2 amazing gentlemen that will be speaking to us today, Mr. John R. Shende and Jaymin Shah of they're global technology leaders. Mr. John, he is the Chief Information Officer, has a plethora of background. If you all haven't read his bio, you all need to check it out. And as well as his co-designer of MyVayda and Chief Technology Officer Jaymin Shah is going to be speaking to us today. And we're going to learn a little bit more about ransomware. A lot of people think ransomware is just for businesses only, and it's not. It's for individuals. That means you can be specifically targeted for your identity to be stolen. And we have all these tracking systems in place to kind of help track down the person who has stolen your identity. But then there is other steps and measures that we need to be aware of, because as the ecosystem changes in business and how we conduct business, then a lot of other things has to change as well. In other words, beefing up our personal identity security. So I just wanted to let you know that today we're going to be learning a lot about what we can do, not just for individuals, for businesses, for board members, for even civic organizations that deals with a lot of people data. That's what we're going to focus on today, on how you can protect it. So I am Teresa Gamble. I am the chapter director of Jacksonville, Florida, Startup Grind. Jacksonville chapter has been established, relaunched in 2019, and our focus is to make sure we educate, we inspire, and we connect you with access to information, experts, and resources. So I'm the host today, but I am not the expert. So we're gonna dive right in and talk with Mr. John and Mr. Jaymin today to find a little bit about who they are, why they choose to do what they do, and what inspired them to be able to go after to solve such a problem that costs our country millions and millions of dollars to do. Welcome, Mr. John and Mr. Jaymin. How are you both doing this afternoon?
Thank you very much. We're doing well. And first of all, I want to say thank you so much for having us on with you. What an awesome introduction. Jaymin and I are very honored to be part of Startup Grind's presentation today and your guest. I am one of the co-founders of Forensic Global, which owns the MyVayda platform. Jaymin Shah, as you mentioned, is our Chief Technology Officer. So I'm not sure if you want us to get into introductions or,
Yeah, well, I just want to ask you a few questions. I was reading over both of you all's bio, and it was very intriguing. You have a lot of global experience, especially dealing with legal team and customer teams around cyber risk management. What is cyber risk management, Mr. John? If you could tell us briefly that our listeners can understand, but some of our techie people may catch on as well.
Right. So, a lot of people think about cyber and risk, sometimes with 2 different breaths, right? Mm-hmm. Cyber obviously, focuses on, the threats to our technology infrastructure, digital attacks, any attack on, an IT or, a piece of technology operating system, that includes your networks, your software, applications, and even, today, of course, our cloud environment. And of course, risk, as we know, is, well, the event of something happening that will cause a negative impact to users, companies, consumers, and so on. For us, cyber risk, and why we combined the both, and it's not something unique to us, of course. The entire industry thinks about cyber risk and cyber threats and so on. However, as we were designing our platform, what was really key to us was, the real risk to an operations within an organization, and not just, cyber by itself, threats by itself, and risks by itself per se. Although, we do have really robust and mature platforms and tools looking at all. And at the end of the day, yes, you need to know what the risk to your cyber operations are, and as a result, what impact that has on the business. So when we started focusing with MyVayda and we said cyber risk, we're basically looking at the risk across an organization, risks that are already calculated in one sense. Risk to network systems, risk to application, risk to other systems within the environment, as well as risks from, third party. All that compounded together, creates sort of a total overarching risk for an organization. So for us, that's basically how we look at cyber risk from our perspective. The risk, the overarching risk to an organization, using our platform to compound that into one sort of risk score, leveraging other risk scores that's out there, of course. And go ahead.
So, Mr. John, let me interrupt. So let me ask you a question. What made you go into this arena with the cyber risk? What have you personally seen or experienced that made you want to even pursue solve such a big problem?
Yeah. And again, I would say we're not the only ones, solving this problem or providing solutions for this. We're unique in this sense. We are looking at it from an identity perspective, an identity fraud perspective.
Okay.
And of course, then we're looking at the cost of impact based on that cyber risk, I just mentioned, for an organization, so that from a board perspective, we can quantify, the cost or the logic behind why someone may say, hey, the CIO puts together a business case and they want an extra $5 million for security operations. What we're doing is helping that CIO or CEO present to the board on why they would, how they will quantify that dollar value based on, the identity threats and fraud, as well as cyber risk. So, for us working in industry, one of the frustrating things for me was, I've acted as, head of security for, some pretty large organizations, and I've also led security. And, what's really frustrating is that search for data when you have to present a report to senior management, especially if you're trying to present a non-technical report, but you have to draw on the technical aspects, to quantify, well, what's your risk impact? What's the cost of that risk? If we don't do something, should we accept it? What's the acceptance cost? And if we have to mitigate, well, what's the investments we would have to put into place, and what kind of controls are we going to tie that into, where an internal auditor would be, oh, great, you guys are doing fine, you passed my internal audit. Or alternatively, when a third-party auditor comes in, they're looking for specific things to either pass or fail your environment, and we have to take that into consideration, especially in publicly traded with, your SOX 404 and your ITGC controls and so on. So, the germination.
So, Mr. John, so Mr. John, let me break it down in layman's terms. So you're saying that in order for you to present to your board of company to present to their board of directors of ramping up internal security to prevent breaches. An individual will need to have to be able to collect this information in a manner where it not only just gives a department or specific division snapshot, it needs to give an entire snapshot of the organization where technology is being used.
That is correct.
Got it. Okay. So how did Jaymin come into play to create MyVayda? How did you two connect?
So it's an interesting story. I had an offer from a former employer. Well, I had interest to be hired by a former employer. And, at the time of that interest, I really wasn't keen on leaving the job I had. Fast forward almost a year later, the company and I that Jaymin was with had another conversation, and I ended up joining. That was about, a little over 4 years ago. And, Jaymin was part of the organization that rolled up to me. And, we met, obviously when I was looking at, restructuring the organization and so on. Someone, mentioned Jaymin's one of the smartest person when it comes to identity and access management and security. And, they spoke about the good work he did for companies like 7-Eleven and Pepsi and, IHG, the travel agency, travel services company, out in Atlanta.
Wow.
So we had a conversation, and, one of the key things with Jaymin is he is extremely technically knowledgeable, very humble, and that really impressed me, the humility, with which he presented his technical capabilities. Fast forward, a couple of months, maybe a year, we had run through some severe, technology escalations and challenges, from some of the clients we worked with. We had several of the Fortune, I would say 200 in our pipeline as customers. And, having worked through several challenges, sometimes late into the night, I realized this guy was by far one of the best technologists, I've ever worked with. And then, eventually time came and Jaymin had to move on. And, after he left the company we were with, we had a couple of conversations, and, I was explaining, what I wanted to do and, some of the challenges I had. And this was based on, a model, a cloud forensics model I created, 8-9 years ago. And that's basically, we took aspects of that, and that's basically where, we hit the ground running. And Jaymin started working on this with his team last year, developing MyVayda.
Wow. So you mean to tell me, okay, let me tell me, Mr. John, that you had sketched out this MyVayda almost 8 years ago. And Jaymin was the person that made your vision become reality. That's what you're telling me.
Well, in a sense, I created a cloud forensics model. Actually, to going back, I'll be transparent. My college may not like me saying this, but I was finishing up my master's degree, 2008, 2009, and I had to write a thesis. And cloud computing wasn't, the rage then. People were still playing with virtualization and so on. A lot of the technologies we have today that supports cloud didn't exist, right? 12 years ago. And I was doing forensics, fascinated with digital forensics and investigations. And then I started thinking, and this is, way back when, right? Of course, technology has leaped forward. But, I was thinking, if somebody has a virtual environment and they shut it down, what happens to all the data in there? Is it gone forever? If they commit a crime, is it still there? How can we get it? Because we shut down a virtual machine, that's it. So I mapped out that cloud forensics, and I was about to present it for my master's thesis, and a colleague said, if you presented to college would own it. And I panicked and I said, okay, I'm not going to do this. Mind you, this was 48 hours before we had to submit it. And I'd been working on this thesis for about 6 months already. So in 48 hours, I had to create another thesis, which of course I didn't get the best of grade for that one. But that's basically how I created that cloud forensics, model. And, I've seen quite a few folks link to it and reference it over the years. But based on that, I came with more of an identity focus, and I said, well, let's use the aspects of the investigations, the tracking, the risk aspects, the risk management, and, let's add what's challenging us right now, 10 years later into leadership, all you keep hearing, or a lot of what you keep hearing is, well, what's the cost? Why do we have to spend so much in security? Why can't we cut the costs in security? Or we have cyber insurance. We don't care. We can get hit by a hack or a ransomware. We'll pay the insurance will pay. But that doesn't solve the problem,
Right.
And, one of the key things I heard from several, board members was, can you guys quantify the cost? Okay, tell me why we should authorize $5, $10, $15 million. Tell me, what are we getting back? Because if we give marketing $5 million, we know we expect to see, maybe a $50 million return on that $5 million, right? From sales and so on. So that's basically how we started, extracting part of what I did in that forensics model to create this MyVayda platform, which, it doesn't really focus on forensics per se, but it's, more identity tracking, more cost optimization, risk management, and, system health kind of thing.
So this is the, I would say, I'm trying to come up with the layman terms. This was pretty much as like your prerequisite model of a person of what if this was to happen. If a company get to a level or a stage that it grows so big and so wealthy and become a viable target for hackers to try to consume or, take their data or either hack their employees to get inside knowledge, you are looking more to help them pre-plan or have a pre-insurance policy in place before it actually happens.
I wouldn't say we want to have a pre-insurance policy in the traditional sense, right? But we want to make sure they're prepared. Nobody can get away from being hacked if, if they don't have the right controls, they don't have the right policies, your processes, skills, monitoring in place, right?
Right.
For instance, and it doesn't matter the size of your company. Once you are, we have seen small companies, we have seen medium-sized companies targeted, and of course, the large ones always hit the news, right?
Right.
But small companies may not have the strength of security protection that larger ones can afford with consultants and, staff and, technologies and so on, right?
Right.
So they would be a key target for some hackers. And, in one instance, some of them may be subcontractors to a larger company, such as, Target had an air conditioning contractor, and, there was, if you look at what happened with Target, we all know that they weren't initially, they weren't the attackers when Target was hacked, a couple of years back. They did not say, we're going to go zero in there and hit them hard, consistently till we get in. They were very stealthy in looking at, different areas, different vendors and different avenues to get in. And thus they got in how they did. So, small companies are a key target, either straight by themselves, or if they are providing services to larger companies and they don't have the right security processes, protocols, protections in place, then in turn, someone can go through that small company into a larger company itself, right? Providing that, there are certain accesses in place that they can take advantage of course. And when I say people, you can't get away from a hack, right? I mean, we're all using a lot of applications. Applications have millions of lines of code. Any single line of code in an application could be a vulnerability that could be exploited, so it's how
So
best.
the McAfee software or the Norton antivirus that they offer us on our computers or on our cell phones or iPad or electronic devices, is that enough? Or do we as individuals need to do more, especially for business owners that do everything either on their mobile phone or more than they do on a laptop or a desktop?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not here to, speak about the McAfees and the Nortons and the semantics of the world.
Right,
They all have their place, right?
right. Mm-hmm.
As a business owner using any piece of technology, you have to be mindful of, how can that, what are you browsing? What are you clicking on? How are you using the mobile phone or your iPad to interact with, databases that have critical information, or, your personal information that, if someone gets that personal information, they can use it to their advantage and your disadvantage, right?
Right.
So as a small business owner is, what kind of, protections do you have in place besides, monitoring and then so on, so there's still, I think, a collection of processes in addition to, antivirus monitoring and, all of those things that's there. Personally, I don't think that's enough,
Right.
But it's a start, and it's a good start.
Awesome. Well, let me ask you a question. I looked at both of you gentlemen's bio, and I see that you all have done a lot of work overseas. So I'm curious, is the ransomware, is it more detrimental in the US than Europe, or vice versa, or is it about the same?
Yeah, so America is the largest economy, so obviously, because of that, that's why you see a lot of attacks, coming into the US. Now, the first recorded or noted ransomware attack didn't occur in the US, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I would say, when we see things like ransomware as a service per se, folks are looking, wherever in the world there's an opportunity to take advantage of a system, such as what happened in the UK with, some of the healthcare entities. If there is an opportunity, it doesn't matter. We live in a virtual world, right? I mean, it's a very small village now. And if there is an opportunity to extract or to gain money or effect an attack to gain money from a system that's connected to an entity where that entity needs that system, it will be done. So again, yes, the US is one of the largest economies. So of course it'll be a high target, but there are other countries that are also being targeted.
Awesome. So, Jaymin, I know you've been pretty quiet, and I know what made you become a chief technology officer, and to partner with Mr. John to create MyVayda.
Yeah, Tari. So, interesting dynamic there too, as John was alluding to. Now, typically what happens is when we take the security landscape into consideration, with experience, what we have noticed, what we have observed is that a lot of the problems that tend to be surfaced and eventually the way they are addressed is dealt using technology. Given that somewhere I had this inclination right from when I started my career towards technology, and had the fortune to dabble with many, many technologies across the length and breadth within the IT space for that matter. One thing which was a natural consideration was addressing problems related to security. But while you're doing that, having had the opportunity to work with so many customers, again, across geographies, as you rightly pointed out, What was evident in that was there are business problems, but businesses again tend to fall back on technology. So somewhere, anything related to security, when it had to be addressed, had that flavor of technology that always came into play. Now, this was something that was right up my target area in terms of the objective that I had, where while continuing in the field of security, I still wanted to focus on technology and the problems, typically the business problems, as I was indicating earlier, that tend to be seen across industries that still needs, though the domain is going to be security, that still needs extensive technology or leverage of technology for that matter. And so as we see right now here, I have had this opportunity to naturally progress from security while still continuing in the space of technology. And that's why I have embraced technology with open arms.
I see that you have, and because of this pandemic, what you two gentlemen have came together to create and co-create is such a necessity right now with the pandemic, with everyone working from home remotely. Children are doing work from K through 12 from home remotely. People working, corporations are having staff to work from home remotely. So I can see what this product has to offer that will really help a lot of corporations who have to really depend on their staff and protecting students from this identity hack and this identity theft. So I just want to say kudos to both of you for staying ahead of the game and sticking with your passion to produce such a ransomware identity theft protection platform to help a person or a business to determine how to mitigate their risk, not just with the security protections, but also knowing how much monetarily that it will cost them to do so and what their return will be on the investment. So I heard Mr. John didn't mention a lot of the companies, but I have talked with you all on several times, and you all are not no little peon. Y'all done work with some major companies that I'm familiar with, like Oracle, and Mr. John mentioned earlier you have worked with 7-Eleven, Jaymin. What is your favorite industry, both of you, that you all like to work with?
I'll let Jaymin go first.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thanks for the honors. So within this industry space, again, if I were to be put in a spot and pick my favorite, it'll be the banking financial.
Yes.
And the reason I say that is, again, I'll just try to qualify that. The reason I say that is somewhere what my experience has been, this has been one of those industries, the banking financial in particular, where creativity has been at its best in terms of the innovation that they bring to the marketplace. Mm-hmm. So that, as a matter of fact, some of these innovations that we have eventually seen being adopted across other industries are the ones that have been conceptualized and have gone through a stage of evolution within the BFSI space. And again, a lot of relevance as far as security is concerned. And the other reason also is because BFSI has seen that maturity. They are a little ahead of the curve. And when I say BFSI, I'm also including the insurance segment within that. The other industries, be it retail, manufacturing, given the constant flux of the dynamics across those industries, one leverage, and this is my personal experience, has been that a lot of the problems that tend to be solved within the BFSI space becomes a natural qualifier when it needs to be adopted by the retail space. And again, the only reason is and this is my personal experience again, but the only reason retail manufacturing has lacked in this curve has been primarily because of the nature of dynamics. There is some immaturity there that we are still seeing. But yes, they definitely have a lot of the solutions that have been tried and tested within the space. So BFSI will be my natural pick.
That's cool, because I know right now in Jacksonville they really trying to incorporate into that fintech space, and with the pandemic, a lot of people is doing a lot of monetary transactions online now. So I agree with you on that one. What about you, Mr. John? What's your favorite industry?
You know,
You have done so much. I bet it's hard for you to choose.
Did we lose him, Therese?
I don't know. Mr. John, are you there? Mr. John? Okay, he's there. I might have connectivity issues. So, Jaymin, my last question for you. I noticed you mentioned on your bio about you do consulting about audit and assessments around IAM. What is IAM, Jaymin, and what type of audits and assessments do you conduct?
Right. Good question, Therese. So IAM it stands for Identity and Access Management, which eventually also has progressed into Identity and Access Governance.
Okay.
In layman's term, what it means is the user, any user for that matter, within an enterprise or somebody who's partnering with an enterprise, all these users still get access, required to be given access to perform their function, their job function. So managing the life cycle for these users and accesses of those users is what identity access management is all about.
Okay.
Now, the audit assessments, again, is centered around especially the identities and the accesses. Besides somebody being given access, an identity being given access, and that access could be to an application or it could be to an infrastructure device. Whatever be the case, but once an access has been given, there is still a lot of auxiliary processes that still need to be enabled, which are required to monitor and also audit in terms of what is going on with that access.
Okay.
So Jaymin has a certain flavor of access for a given application. Is that access that Jaymin has been given enough to perform his day-to-day operations or activities? Or is it that he's abusing that access? He's overusing that access? No,
Okay, so Jaymin, I'm finna go to a movie clip. You know how you watch certain movies, let me see, Jason Bourne, and FBI people is tracking him down, and the lead investigator, she goes in the database and she gets a fingerprint is ran, and this big old error message come up and says you need to have a certain security level access. That's what you're talking about.
Right, absolutely.
Look, I had to do something, but I know what you was talking about. But you just made me thought about that movie when the lead investigator, she was trying to get into a certain access record of someone's fingerprint, and she didn't have that level of clearance necessary to get it. So that's what you're saying, that what you do for the identity assessment consultant, which
Correct.
I think is real cool.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, I enjoy. We gonna get into y'all presentation. I just wanted our audience to learn and hear a little bit about the vision, the visionary behind MyVayda, and the importance of it. And yes, big startups, it may appear like it's over your head, and you may not think you need this right now, but it's best to be proactive than reactive. And that's what I believe these gentlemen are bringing to the table to help us as startups to become more proactive, to put these systems and protections in place ahead of time. So when the ransom attempt or cyber attack comes, or the risk happens, that you're prepared for it and you don't have to pay out more than you invested in. So, Jaymin, I'm going to let you and Mr. John, I think he's back, to go through your presentation so we can learn a little bit more about MyVayda.
Yeah, Therese, can we just enable the controls for John 2 again, please?
Okay, hold on one
I
second.
think he's lost that option.
No, he let me see. No, he still has it on. Let me recheck, make sure. You turn it off and turn it back on. As a host. You all also have another guest with you all today, Mr. Kirk Anderegg. Am I saying his name right, Jaymin?
Kirk Anderegg, yes.
Okay. Welcome, Mr. Anderegg. Okay, I think Mr. John, there you are.
Right. So, hey, so your question with ransomware, I don't think I was too clear. We had ransomware that goes back to like the late 80s, but that's, it's during the AIDS crisis and so on. But we really started seeing it, heavily monetized, in the last, couple of years. So I just wanted to make sure we were clear on that. It's not something that's new, but it's been around for a bit.
Right. Exactly. All right, Jaymin, we're gonna bring you all. Let me know when you all want to bring in Mr. Kirk, okay?
Yeah, I mean, you can bring him in, I guess, if you wish.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Kirk, can you hear? Are you there?
He's there. Now I think he has it.
All right. Mr. Kirk, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Welcome. Nice to meet you.
Perfect. Thanks, Therese. Nice to be here.
Awesome. Tell us briefly a little bit about who you are and what you do and how you know these two amazing gentlemen, Mr. John and Mr. Jaymin.
Yeah, so I'm the CISO over at Advian. If you look at my background, I've been doing security for well over 2 decades in the Big Four from an advisory and consultant perspective, all the way from assessments to implementations to just guiding various clients across different industry verticals around security matters. And then once I left the Big Four, I moved over into more of an operational type role, focused on not only internal, but also as an outsourced provider, helping other people manage their day-to-day security operations. And I've been doing that for, say, the last 8+ years or so. So over the span of my career, I've had the opportunity to interact with these two guys on several occasions and different client environments, and always a pleasure kind of interacting with them and picking their brains and helping them as much as they have helped me.
That's amazing. I love it. Teamwork made the dream work. I love it.
Absolutely. Yep.
All right, Jaymin, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Yep. So, and first of all, we want to thank Kirk for his input here when it comes to some of the scope that he looks at, with ransomware. So when we're talking about this, what I would do is maybe ask Kirk to set this up, because he has been working on a situation with ransomware, and we will take it from the next couple of slides. So, Kirk.
All right. Thanks, Sean. Yeah. So over the years, been involved with a number of different situations with ransomware, and a lot of what we do from a service provider perspective is really supporting our clients in terms of various aspects, whether it's from the incident response perspective, whether it's be from the kind of post remediation and how do we come in and clean it all up, But real recently, been involved with a client of ours that was hit, I'd say probably 2 months ago. And we've been in kind of from an outside perspective, in supporting some of the internal audit functions for this particular client, as well as some other services. And when they got hit, a lot of what we were asked to do was help kind of identify what was going on in terms of the scope, what were the systems that have been impacted, how far-reaching was it in terms of the pervasiveness across the environment, and particularly from one of the key sort of stakeholders that we were interacting with, the external auditors. They were really interested in figuring out what was the impact from a SOX perspective, from a financial statement audit perspective, on the controls and the numbers at the end of the day for both the period that was impacted and then what were some of the carryover effects after that. So as you can see on the screen, there was some series of different questions that we needed to make sure that we help management answer to external audit in terms of the what, when, and the how of the event, and then really understanding kind of what the impact was, as I alluded to, from both a data perspective and a financial systems perspective, because those are kind of the big important aspects, those 2 points there around impact. I think from a security perspective, context is everything, right? And I think as we look at the audits and looking at what was impacted and how it was impacted, everybody needs to be on board with an understanding and being transparent about what happened. So we were pretty critical there in terms of collecting and presenting that information. And I totally agree with that statement there. There's no magic button to defeat ransomware. I think I heard John allude earlier to the fact that, it's a series of different steps across people, process, and technology that we're always oriented towards in terms of ensuring we're aligned to protect and defend against it. Is that what do you want, John?
So,
Yep.
Kirk, I got a quick question before you move on. What is, I see the under your win, what is social engineering?
Social engineering is really a key way that some of the attackers are trying to get into our environments. You take a look at, any company has a lot of employees, right, that are authorized to access certain information, certain systems and data within the environment. And social engineering is just a tactic that's used to try to understand about the targets, like looking at your profiles online, understand about, from a LinkedIn perspective, hey, what is your role? What do you like to do from maybe some of your Facebook posts? And really what that allows you to do is orient your tactics towards appealing to those characteristics or interests that you have that's sure to set kind of set the hook, right? They call it phishing for a reason, because it's aligned with going after a fish, as part of a sport, right? It's getting the right lure, the right bait to get you hooked and use you as a platform or a vector to get into an environment, whether it's via email or whether it's via the phone.
Wow, I like that explanation. That makes a whole bunch of sense. So I know when I get my team, you cannot be using social media.
Just be really careful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for explaining, Kirk. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so amazing, Therese, that you see people posting on Facebook and Instagram and all these other social media platforms, and it makes me really nervous because honestly, you can tell someone what they do, what's their daily life like, when do they go to Starbucks, or what's their favorite restaurant, how often do they eat at that restaurant, or when are they going for vacation? We have seen cases where people are posting their Hawaiian vacation photos and their houses are getting robbed because people have realized, hey, these folks are not home. So it's always really careful. And, I personally have a rule of thumb. When I used to use Facebook, I really don't use it much anymore. If I'm flying from Europe to the US, and my family needs to, if I can't call them, I would post after I touch down at my second stop rather than my first one. So that someone might think I'm leaving somewhere, but I've already left and I'm at my destination.
That's smart.
So when my family sees that, they know that I've landed safely rather than I'm leaving, and they don't know what happened in between. And even photos, I rarely, post photos, because then you can geolocate people, right? You have those geotags on photos that the place it was taken, the time it was taken, and so on. And now everyone wants to tag their friends, in photos. So, it's pretty interesting. And as we say here, good hygiene, right? Good hygiene doesn't necessarily mean technology alone. Right. It has to mean understanding policies, understanding the threats of when someone, tries to get to you, are they friend or foe? And for example, we talked about, you were like, hey, is ransomware global? Absolutely. Because there was one, back when I was over in Europe, 2012 or so, called Reviton. And it was nicknamed sort of the police ransomware, because what folks would find happening to their system was, their system would be locked, and they were like, hey, you're being monitored by law enforcement. And, in some instances, their webcam would be hacked, and the message would have like an image of their face looking back at the PC to make them feel police was watching them, when it was really these ransomware attackers, and they had to like pay some sort of little, fee for the investigation to go, whatever it was, or to unlock their system, so it's been around. It's just been really weaponized, I would say, as, for business perspective in the last, 5 or 6 years or so. Where we are seeing, the costs going up and the fees for ransom going up. Yeah, so what we're just some stats and facts for you. There's some confusion by some folks who don't deal with this. What is it? Is it some kind of new thing? It's just malicious software, basically malware.
Right.
I mentioned the AIDS one back in 1989 or so, and basically the gentleman that created that, Joseph Pop, it was targeting, believe it or not, healthcare way back when. Wow. And, that was called, more or less the AIDS Trojan, looking at, the aspect of that medical information around that. So it's been around. It's just morphed and improved over time. And, an attacker will use some of the same processes as we would explain in the slides coming. There are some well-known families, out there, as you saw on the last slide, that we're seeing being used more and more. And some of these, the Sword and Revel, the Maze and all of that, we're seeing, they're offering it as, a service now that people can simply utilize it, right? They don't have to be very technical per se. They just pay for the service and they can utilize it.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah. And one of the things, we keep hearing, is it like a virus? And, yes and no, a virus is malicious software, right? But basically it copies and multiplies itself, right? And it propagates, it just jumps from one to the next per se. And with ransomware, it's all about, well, Therese, you have all your client's personal information in this database, I'm going to lock it so you can't get it.
Oh, wow.
Want the key to unlock it? Pay me for it.
Wow. That reminds me of this, I think it was Lake City, Florida, here not too far from Jacksonville. One of the hackers got into their the city database system where the individuals had to pay their utility bill. And most of them, they had the community paying everything online. But because the hackers got control of their systems, they had to manually come in and pay their utility bill, but they couldn't post the payments until the city paid the ransom to get back control of the site.
Yep, absolutely, and that's what we're seeing. And we'll share a little bit about that. We talked about Baltimore and Atlanta in later slides.
Okay.
And that's the whole thing, right? It's not necessarily we're going after large organizations, but we're going after people's conveniences. We're going after how a state or a city does business now, because we go online and part of going online is not only convenience, but a reduction in, cost of services for the state or the city per se. So if we looked at the next slide, we have seen 700% increase year on year in ransomware attacks. And, we're hearing that by 2021, every 11 seconds, you would see someone getting hit by a ransomware attack. And look, we're not saying this to scare people. Jaymin and I did a presentation for another organization, and we had one comment, just one person's comment about we're trying to scare people. The fact is we're not. We're just trying to be practical. It's like you're driving your car. Can you get into an accident? Yes. Will you get into an accident? Maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, when I drive, I don't look at the car in front of me alone. I look at 2 and 3 cars ahead, and I always check my rearview mirror. Most drivers may not do that, right? Because they're busy with, somebody just texted them, or, they're on a phone call, or they're distracted otherwise. So what we're saying is be aware of it. Don't be frightened by it,
Right.
Yes, we're seeing people, using the ransomware as a service. We're seeing folks looking at taking advantage of remote workers and flaws in their home systems, or flaws in how they connect, via a VPN or other aspects to their work environment. What concerns us is, traditionally it was, hey, we lock your system, pay us, we unlock it. But now we're seeing folks not only locking, they're copying the data. And, now you run the risk. If I pay, will they unlock it? Or will they not? And if it's unlocked, is my data damaged, changed, deleted? You will still have to run, an audit. You would still have to do system checks and so on. And sometimes you might have such bad data corruption that you will still have to rebuild, and some folks opt to not pay and just choose to rebuild. But that's timely, and that's very costly.
Wow, that's interesting. Yep. However, in other words, ransomware is not going to go away. We don't need to be afraid of it, but just know there is a solution for it.
There's not a solution for it in that traditional term. There are best practices to prepare yourself.
Okay.
To minimize, the impact. With cybersecurity threats and with hacking, it's not that you could never be hacked. It's when you will be hacked.
Right.
And when you are hacked, then it's how well was I prepared for this, to keep my business operations running, to basically subvert that attack, minimize the risk impact, ensure that loss is not, it's at an acceptable level when, we have to face losses. Are we doing the best things, everything right? Do we have the right policies in place, the right training and awareness? the right monitoring, the right analysis. We can have all of these things and still get hacked. It's the response at that point in time where you're responding to reduce that impact as much as possible, reduce that risk. So you and I and Jaymin earlier, we were talking about, local government and so on. And, Kirk and I were having a conversation about this actually, with respect to the client he's dealing with and other things. We saw that, that 2018 ransomware attack on Atlanta, right? And one of the articles that we saw cited $2.6 million to recover. And, the ransomware was 52,000. Kirk mentioned to me that, he had seen that other costs mounted to even more than that $2.6 million.
Wow.
We saw the same thing with Baltimore, and Baltimore had a similar, that payment thing that you mentioned, right, was somewhat similar. Folks could not transact on that. And of course, this year with all the elections and, this, charges of malfeasance and so on, everyone was worried about, databases getting hacked or ransomware affecting it. And, the authorities have said that this, they have taken the best measures, right? To date, we have not seen read any report of any incident, pertaining to ransomware or anything with the elections. I don't know if something may come out next year in analysis, but we have not seen anything like that.
That's good.
Yeah, and I thought that was pretty good too. But that doesn't mean the attacks against states are not going away, right? We have seen 60 reported earlier in the year. They slowed down the ransomware attacks against state and local governments, right? But they slowed down due to COVID. And it's not necessarily, it went away. It's, were the attacks, reported, during that time.
Interesting.
So, now when we start talking about the actuality of, what can and cannot happen, yes, ransomware can infect and disrupt election systems, and typically I do it one by one so that we can talk about it, but we have all the data up here already, the talking points up here. So we know it can happen, right? The thing is, when it comes to elections and so on, what is the concern? The concern is voter registration, right? The databases for that. And not only, the concern about changes to active registrants or anything like that, but rather on the eve of election, if something is unavailable, then what happens, So that should always be, top of mind, preparing for scenarios like that. And, some of the things that not only applies here, but it applies to anyone, that has technology systems is ensuring they have multiple backups, right? Now, the thing is with backups, you have to be careful that they're clean backups because, we have seen cases where backups were infected with ransomware anyway. So when you try to restore it, boom, you're locked again, So ensuring that those backups are, you take it in a manner where, it's tested and, it's clean per se, in inverted commas. Air gapping was something I know, Kirk mentioned during his time with segmentation and zero trust. So air gapping is basically ensuring that it's not connected right. And Kirk, if you want to give an example of how you guys do air gapping, maybe you can, jump in.
So I think the whole concept of backups is incredibly important, as you alluded to, John, and not to focus specifically on air gapping just right now, but as we look at kind of the evolving nature or the evolving techniques around using ransomware. We've noticed over the last year plus that, when the attackers are laterally spreading across the environment, oftentimes they're searching for those backups, because historically, kind of the whole nature of the backup was designed to quickly restore an environment back to its kind of pre-ransomware condition, and quickly accelerate restoring business processes back to how it was. So there's been kind of an evolving nature of how we've looked at backups and how we've secured backups, not only separating those backups from the domain, kind of from where anybody can touch it, only allowing specific services to connect and utilize that backup so nobody else can get to those, or even so far as to have kind of manually pulling things off and restoring it in a completely separated and segmented environment. I think we've seen kind of all sorts of different practices, but ultimately it's how do we make sure that nobody can access our backup copies? That's really what the intent is.
Wow, that sounds like surgery. That sounds like surgery. Yeah. But it's better to be safe than sorry. That's amazing. All right, John. What's next?
So we're going to walk you through how a ransomware attack occurs, and in the next slide, Jaymin, like with any attack, you start with campaigning, where you talked earlier, you mentioned that social engineering aspect, right? Mm-hmm. So the whole aspect of a campaign is you're looking, as an attacker, you're looking at the landscape. You're looking at the landscape to see who's out there, what are they doing, are any doors open, can I walk in, or do I have to break a lock and walk in, right? In a campaign. Once you get all that data, then you can and how you can get in, then you can start working on the second phase, which is more or less dropping that initiation of that infection itself, and then we go forth to the third step, which is your setup, your forth constant search, and then the encryption. So in the next slide, Jaymin, if we can skip forward, basically in that campaign itself, what we see is, that initialization via email, and of course, phishing with that bait. I don't know if you saw the movie Ocean's 9.
Yes.
You remember Rihanna? She created the puppy. Uh-huh. For the guy who was well into puppies and so on, and he got the email and he hesitated. He knew he should not have clicked on the link. He knew it because he hesitated, but because it was puppies, he clicked on it. And then he saw all the puppy information and the pictures, and he started scrolling. And what Rihanna did at that juncture, was she infected his system. And she took control of his system, and basically that's what happens right then. And that juncture, depending on what kind of authorizations you have, it's game over, because now they control everything. So the deep dive in the next slide, when we talk about infections and initiating infections, that's exactly what she did, right? She installed the malware. And then she started, observing and looking at what he was doing. In ransomware's aspect, these are some examples of, when we download a malicious piece of software, what is it supposed to do? It wants to gain a foothold. Then it wants to put in a tool where it can keep its presence live. Even if somebody shuts down the computer and it comes back up, they still want to maintain, that control. And you remember how she took over like the camera systems and all of that. So basically this is exactly what she did. maintain that connection. And when we go towards staging and setup, now in the next slide, what we want to do is continue to look and observe and look at the entire environment. And when we look at the entire environment, we're looking for more weaknesses. We're looking for your Nortons to shut it off, your monitoring, all of that. We're looking to turn that off so it doesn't catch us. And Kirk mentioned expanding laterally. So once we're there and we start shutting things off, we can jump now from system to system.
Wow.
And if you are an administrator, it's great for us. We can take your credentials now and log into other systems and so on. So that's basically what happens, during this environment, this stage, sorry. And of course, in stage 4 with the content search, as we talked about the lateral movement, it's what are we looking for now? We're looking for what's in if you have backup servers connected, what's in there? If you have other databases systems, what's in there? Can I take anything? Can I lock? Are there any transactional systems, I can lock? And at that juncture, on the next slide, once we figure out what we can lock, we then encrypt it. And then it's panic, right? At that juncture, because we can't access the system. So that's it at a high level. If we look at it, one of the ransomware that's out there called Ryuk, because they target enterprise environments, they have earned over $9 million, in ransomware, in just 52 transactions. So that's a lot of money for just 52 clicks.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm reading that you're saying that the Department of Treasury say it's illegal to pay ransomware to cyber criminals.
Right. That's an interesting, statement there, because we on October 6th, and we have been, trying to look at, more information when it comes for that. Basically, Treasury's Office of Foreign Asset Control issued an advisory, and that advisory warned, cyber insurers, financial institutions, and others, that pays ransomwares not to encourage ransomware payments, but also to be on an alert that could risk violating OFAC regulations. Because rather than trying to reduce the exposure, what they can be facilitating is, well, if you pay, then that means it's viable. We will keep effecting ransomware attacks because people are paying it. So what they're saying is OFAC will, put into place sanctions on, these threat actors. And there's the aspect of enforcement and penalties where they're saying that with their economic sanctions guidelines, they're looking to put in place assessments against organizations for violating U.S. economic sanctions law. And there will be civil penalties based on the value of the transaction, the ransomware payment, ranging from $1,000 to over $300,000. There will also be criminal penalties that could be fined from $50,000 to $10 million, and imprisonment ranging from 10 to 30 years.
Wow.
For violations,
So that is where the GDPR came in, and that they launched is to kind of counteract some of this activity or to be in compliance with OFACs.
Not necessarily. GDPR is Global Data Protection Regulation, and that's a totally different aspect.
Got it. Okay.
That's for data privacy itself. and California Consumer Privacy Act is going along the same lines of GDPR, but they just focus on data privacy.
Got it. Okay, gotcha. Because I've heard people use GDPR, very loosely, and I want to make sure our listeners, whoever listening now and later, to understand that GDPR is different than what Mr. John and Jaymin and Mr. Kirk is talking about. All right, continue, gentlemen.
Yeah, so we with the platform that we have Kirk and his team leveraging, we thought we wanted to show it a little bit to you all today. Okay. So Jaymin, maybe you can flip to the demo. I think we're actually going to do a live session.
Oh, wow. Interesting. So I'm very while Jaymin is getting ready, I'm very I'm learning more and more to understand more about the ransomware technology, because a lot of people have been pushing cloud technology, and I used to be very leery of it. It took me a minute to get comfortable with saving data in the cloud, but I've had some people that passed away or had individuals didn't have access to the information, but they was able to get access to their cloud account. They so happens to back up everything in their cloud account. And they was able to, I guess, fulfill or carry out the closure of the business or the role this person had because they had access to the cloud account. So you all are giving me, a little bit of comfortability, but I'm still leery myself with certain things I do.
Yeah, so I mean, cloud security is a shared responsibility, and there's something called the shared responsibility model of security. And folks are always concerned about, well, if I put it out there, I don't have it under my control and so on. But I mean, Microsoft and the other cloud service provider that's out there, even folks like Oracle that's up and coming, or even Google, these are large corporations, so they have monitoring for looking at, the attack surface, or how are we looking at visibility and tracking or workloads in the cloud, and they're looking at things like automation and, really good monitoring and so on. And key, you asked about identity and access management earlier. So right. they have, specific processes for how user roles are set up and so on, and what kind of privilege they have, within the cloud environment. And the U.S. government has something called FedRAMP, and a lot of these larger companies have FedRAMP certified cloud, environments. So, I mean, it has come a long way in 10 years.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So, John, if a organization, regardless of their size and their industry, how could they contact you and Jaymin and Kirk for you all to do a threat assessment or a SWOT analysis of the cybersecurity system? Yep. How can they reach you all?
Yeah, so I mean, email is always the best way. We're on Twitter. We actually just started Twitter because of you, So we don't have as much followers from a business perspective. I mean, my personal Twitter is different. I never really had a business Twitter per se that I was active on. So email john.shende at forensicglobal.com or jaymin.shah at forensic-global.com. That's the best way to get us. And of course, via you, right? If someone.
Of course. So, do y'all have a website up for MyVayda yet?
Yeah, so we have a forensic site. We are actually launching the MyVayda website. We kept MyVayda in stealth, right? It's still a startup. We have what's called a minimum viable product. We're looking to add aspect of artificial intelligence in it. We're already using machine learning. And we really didn't want to put it out there until we had that minimal, viable product, or MVP, as the business calls it. So we will be launching that site, MyVayda, MyVayda.com, very shortly.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it. I'm quite sure Jaymin gonna make sure, and Kirk gonna make sure all the bells and whistles on their website.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. So those of you that's listening or tuning in late, Mr. John just went over what is the anatomy of a ransom attack, which I think is very cool and very understandable. But also, Mr. John, how can you help a startup who already is overwhelmed, trying to launch the business, trying to get customers, trying to make sure they're doing a business model? And even Kirk, you can jump in. How can a startup leverage this, especially with a lot of service industry people like myself? We're trying to move from offline to online. And when you doing those type of services, we have monetary transactions, how they pay, trying to streamline how to do invoicing and contracting. What do we need to do besides the normal stuff that comes with our technology devices to be prepared, even though we know the ransom attacks are going to come?
Well, the ransomware attacks for extremely small, we have seen individuals got hit with it, right? We have seen individuals and small businesses. But, as we talked about ransomware as a service, no one's going to invest, a lot of money in a ransomware as a service to go after an individual whose net worth is, $5,000. You know what I mean? They would probably want to go after some of the medium-sized state and local government, things like that, high network individuals. But small businesses starting up. I know Kirk has been doing a lot of work, with some of the smaller businesses in their portfolio. So I would defer to him based on his CISO, credentials there, for what he's seeing in the field.
Okay.
Yeah, John, and I would say that a lot of it is just kind of focus on some of the basics, right? I think we've got and we've used a kind of a methodology that does an assessment against various criteria that we've seen as being very critical to either inhibiting or stopping this type of attack from a ransomware perspective. But I'd say, aside from that assessment, it's really just kind of focused on what are we doing from a system hygiene perspective, and typically that would involve looking at your patches, right? Assessing what are some of the configurations that you have in the environment, making sure that you've got good password controls around your critical accounts, and supplementing that with your two-factor or multi-factor authentication to make it more difficult for somebody to use authorized user accounts for nefarious activity. We've talked about kind of the backups, another big area of focus. I know that a lot of times, from a startup perspective, you're really focused on kind of moving forward, right? And building up a lot of the key aspects of the business. And part of that, and I think we've seen a lot of the effects of that over the last year from a COVID perspective, and that's really a focus on business resiliency, right? Those aspects that, hey, what are the riskiest parts to my business, whether that's the processes, whether that's security, and making sure that you've got kind of the technology aligned and the processes aligned to help reduce that risk. And, I think we've helped people out, just conversations, assessments. Always happy to have conversations with people. But that's kind of where I guess I would start. It's kind of rely on some of the experts that are out there that can help you through this, so you can focus on what matters the most to you and what you're best at, right, as a startup. And that's the idea that was in your head around some problem that you're trying to solve, and let other experts handle the rest of the matter, right?
That's amazing, Kirk. I'm glad you said that, because I do have the password protection. I have the two-step verification authentication to my email, to my phone. So that you let me know I'm on the right track. I'm doing everything right. After my identity being hacked about 2-3 times.
You learned. It's good.
Yes, I did. Mr. Jaymin, what's going on?
Yep. So a good segue here is, now both John and Kirk mentioned about the hygiene that needs to be in place. Some of these very basic, but eventually when we think about it, what essentially happens, we tend to get so engaged in our day-to-day operations and activities for that matter. And when I say we, it is the organizations. Now, there is still this element that is required, which is keeping a tab on what is it that is going on as far as the cyber risk is concerned. Something which you brought up earlier in a conversation, Therese. There have been historically, traditionally, conventionally, we have seen instances where the cyber risk, the way it has been measured is it has been qualitative. See a red, blue, green color coding, and that is what is the risk posture typically that is graded as far as the cyber or the risk is concerned for an organization.
Wait a minute, Jaymin, are you screen sharing?
Yeah, I'm just setting the stage before I share the screen.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Yes,
I heard you mentioning colors. Go ahead.
Yeah. So now what has happened is we see the need where there is this essential primary requirement to also start quantifying the cyber risk. Besides that cognitive bias that we see in that color coding that tends to be shared with the executives.
Okay.
Traditionally, challenges around this have been, just as we stepped through the life cycle of the ransomware process, we would have noticed that there is this constant changing landscape of attacks. Now, this requires obviously visibility and formalization in terms of what is the nature of attack. And what it also requires is it needs a framework that can allow building a formally defined risk appetite, which invariably will also help in baselining both the strategic investments and the preparedness to respond to scenarios in case if they were to occur. Like the ones that we saw even for ransomware. Ransomware is a classic example. So right now, having set the stage, I'll quickly pull up one of the core features that is a functional module within MyVayda, which we call it as the risk meter, primarily used for quantifying or measuring cyber risk. Let me know once we start seeing my screen.
This is your host. We just want to take a station identification to let you know we just got through hearing an amazing fireside chat with John Jaymin Shah, and guest keynote speaker Kirk Anderegg, talking about crisis risk management, ransomware, SWOT identity. Stay tuned. There's so much more to come.